It all started on a bitterly cold night when snow was swirling in the air. Out of nowhere, my cell phone rang. Picking it up, I was greeted by the wrathful voice of my mother-in-law on the other end. "It's because of you that my daughter's in this state. Her face is unrecognizable. It's atrocious. You need to take responsibility. Why did you abandon my daughter? You're despicable." My name is Amy, and I'm 33 years old. I live with my husband, Zach. Zach has his parents and an older sister. That single phone call from my mother-in-law that night turned my life upside down. "Give me back my lively girl! Why did you do something so horrible? I swear, I'll make you pay for this. I'll never forgive you." My mother-in-law, possibly out of shock, was making no sense. All she did was spew venom at me. "Mother-in-law, please calm down. I have no idea what you're talking about." Even in my confusion, I tried my best to console my mother-in-law, desperately trying to listen to what she had to say. But all my efforts were futile. "You have no right to be calm at a time like this. It's all your fault. And yet, you have the audacity to say such things. Why didn't you help her? Why did you abandon her?" My mother-in-law was just yelling loudly while crying, and there was no conversation at all. Even when I told her to speak slowly, it was like my voice was not reaching her ears, and my mother-in-law's vitriol continued endlessly. My father-in-law, who seemed to have been behind my mother-in-law, took over the phone. "Amy, I hope you understand what you've done. Do you understand the state our daughter is in now? Fortunately, her life is not in danger, but she has severe injuries. Why did you let her suffer like this?" Since my father-in-law was a little calmer, I honestly told him, "Father, I'm sorry. I really don't understand what you two are talking about. What on earth happened?" He looked perplexed that I knew nothing, but somehow I got him to tell me the story. It was content that made me doubt my ears. My sister-in-law, a single mother, was living with her young child about a 20-minute walk from my home. She had a young boyfriend who she had been dating for some time, and he frequently visited. I had heard from Zach that he had a quick temper and had often raised his hand to my sister-in-law. Apparently, his mood was bad last night, and my sister-in-law suffered from more violence than usual. She felt danger to their lives, so she picked up her child in a frenzy and ran out of the house into the falling snow. Without anywhere to go, my sister-in-law thought of her brother, who had lived nearby, and ran desperately, hoping to find refuge at our house. When my sister-in-law rang the doorbell, Zach, who was home at the time, answered. My sister-in-law stood outside the door, holding her child in her only clothes, her face bruised and gasping for breath. Anyone would have known at first glance that something was wrong, but Zach did not show concern for his own sister. Instead, he seemed a bit irritated and said, "If I let people in without permission, Amy will get mad. Sorry, but can you go home? She's scary when she's angry. You understand, right? Please leave," and turned her away from the door. My sister-in-law couldn't believe what her real brother had said, but she was in immediate danger and needed to hide somewhere, so she begged him in tears. "At least lend me money for a hotel." She had left in a panic and didn't have her cell phone or wallet. But Zach said something even more astonishing. "There's no way I have that kind of money. There's money in the house, but there's no way Amy would let me use it without permission. If I did something like that, she'd divorce me. Sorry, but could you try somewhere else? It's cold, so I'm going in. See you." And he closed the door, coldly sending my sister-in-law away. In utter despair, holding her young child, fearing that the two of them would freeze to death, she trudged back through the snow and reluctantly returned home, only to be met with even worse violence from her enraged boyfriend. My sister-in-law was beaten until her face was unrecognizable, and the child was kicked and lost consciousness. She tried to stop him by clinging to her boyfriend, but the violence only escalated, and her screams echoed through the neighborhood, along with the sound of breaking dishes and things being destroyed. A passerby who heard this and realized something was wrong reported it to the police. After that, my sister-in-law and her child, who had been beaten all over and collapsed, were found and immediately taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Now, although they are conscious, they are seriously injured and have been hospitalized with a prognosis of 1 month for full recovery. I got home late last night because of work, and my sister-in-law did not come after I got home. If I had been there, I would have never turned her away. If I had seen my sister-in-law in that state, I think I would have immediately judged it to be dangerous, let her in, and then called the police. I don't understand why it is believed among my in-laws that I was the one who turned her away. And on top of the shock that such a terrible thing happened to my sister-in-law, I couldn't organize the reality that my in-laws were crying and blaming me for this, and I was very confused. Despite my father-in-law's relentless accusations, I knew I had to clear up the misunderstanding. Frantically, I explained. I wasn't home when sister-in-law came by. I worked late last night at the cafe I run. Had I been home, I would have noticed her unusual behavior and let her in. I would never turn her away. Please give me some time to figure out what happened. Although he wasn't convinced, he seemed to cool down and hung up the phone. That day, I was working late at my cafe, developing a new menu. I had informed Zach about the expected time I'd be home, but I ended up working longer. I ended up missing the last subway and had to take a taxi, not arriving home until past midnight. When I got home, I saw Zach, but he didn't mention a thing about his sister. I was confused about why he had done what he had, so I confronted him after he came home from work that night. His response was shocking. I could tell something was wrong when she showed up, but I was just about to enjoy my beer, and it was cold outside, so I wanted to close the door quickly. Plus, I didn't think there was anything I could do about it. I couldn't hide my anger at his selfish excuse. Didn't you feel anything seeing her like that? Why couldn't you at least let her in? She's been through a lot since you turned her away. When I detailed his sister's current condition, he justified himself by saying, "Remember how you used to complain when my parents dropped in without notice? I thought I was being considerate by not letting her in, thinking you wouldn't like it. What did I do wrong?" Turns out, he had assumed that I would be bothered if his sister showed up unannounced and turned her away. I asked him another question. Why didn't you lend her any money? You could have done that much, couldn't you? He responded, I was taken aback when she asked for money. I'm short on cash right before payday. I just lost money playing slots recently, and I hardly had $10 in my wallet. If I gave her our household money, I knew you would get mad, so I refused. I don't see anything wrong with what I said. I was speechless, completely shocked. I had always thought he was a bit self-centered, but he also had many good qualities. I had been giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I realized it was a terrible mistake. He was incapable of making sound decisions because he always put himself first. He had no compassion for others, not even a bit of kindness. And he was foolish enough to prioritize his drinking over his own sister's distress. But it was too late to realize this now. He didn't seem to feel guilty or responsible at all about his sister being rushed to the hospital. From my perspective, she would have ended up like this anyway, no matter where she ran off to. On the bright side, she's safe in the hospital now. We're both safe. All thanks to me, right? He was talking about it as if it was someone else's business. His heartless remarks were making me feel like I was losing my sanity, so I decided not to talk to him any longer. Holding back my anger, I reported to my father-in-law about Zach's irresponsible behavior towards his sister the previous night. Upon hearing my words, Zach's father lost his composure. In a fit of rage, he exclaimed, "There's no way my Zach would do such a thing to his own sister! You're lying! Stop making up stories, Amy! Are you trying to make Zach the worst just to escape your own guilt? If you're going to spew such nonsense, then show me some proof." He refused to listen to me at all, and again blamed me for everything. I endured his accusations while desperately trying to figure out how to prove my innocence. If things remained this way, I would be branded a monster, while Zach, the real culprit who drove his sister away, would live on without any sense of guilt or retribution. This was a situation I could not tolerate. I remembered that my sister-in-law had arrived at our home around 9 p.m. that night. After much thought, I found something that could prove my innocence. My shop was equipped with a security camera. The footage clearly showed me working alone until around 11 p.m. that night. Armed with this footage and another piece of evidence, a taxi receipt that showed the time I got home, I went to my in-laws and proved that I wasn't at home at the time. I was at my shop when your daughter came home. Do you believe me now? It was probably something they didn't want to believe, but faced with clear evidence, they had no choice but to accept it. Zach's father, his hand trembling, muttered, "So, Amy wasn't home then." Despite their shock, Zach's parents hurriedly called him in to uncover the truth about that night. The moment he arrived, they fiercely demanded, "Why did you drive your sister away?" Just as he had done with me, Zach tried to deflect all blame onto me, claiming that he thought I would dislike having his sister in our home. Hearing this, his father said, "We already know that Amy wasn't home at that time, but your sister says she saw a woman in the house. How do you explain that, Zach?" I was speechless. If there was another woman in our home at 9 p.m., there was only one possible explanation. Wait, Zach, what is going on? Who is this woman? I asked him, my voice shaking. Zach's face turned pale as he squirmed under the questioning from both his parents and me, until he finally confessed everything. When I told him I would be late because I was working on a new menu, he saw it as an opportunity to bring his mistress home. He knew I often came home after midnight when I was immersed in my work, so he felt safe in inviting her over. When his sister suddenly showed up, asking to be let in, he panicked and drove her away for fear of his affair being discovered. "You fool! Not only did you betray Amy, but you also left your only sister out in the snow! What were you thinking? Why didn't you lend her any money? Explain yourself!" His father's anger was overwhelming, and Zach confessed the real reason he hadn't given her any money. He actually had plenty of spending money left, but he didn't want to lend it because then he wouldn't be able to buy the bag and shoes he wanted to give his mistress. He didn't want to upset his mistress for the sake of his sister, so he wanted to get rid of her quick, which led to shutting the door on her, Zach admitted. I was furious, but Zach's parents were even more so. "Before being a brother or a husband, you lack basic human decency. It's our responsibility as parents that you grew up to be this kind of person. But we cannot tolerate this and maintain our relationship. From today, we are cutting ties with you. Don't ever show your face to us again." Zach's father disowned him. In a similar vein, I added, "I'm divorcing you. You cheated on me and put your sister's life at risk by leaving her out in the snow. I can't live with someone like you anymore." Zach was shocked at being disowned and confronted with a divorce, all at once, and started begging for forgiveness, crying, I'm sorry! I won't do it again! Please forgive me!" He clung to his father's leg, but his father simply shook him off. "What you did is the absolute worst thing in our eyes." His parents and I never forgave Zach. Apparently, he had been having an affair with the other woman for a year now. The mistress was a coworker at Zach's company, who he'd been secretly bringing to our house when I wasn't around. It was infuriating to learn I'd been betrayed behind my back for so long. Zach even tried to blame his treatment of my sister-in-law on me, which only added to my anger, so I had no second thoughts about divorcing him. I made Zach sign the divorce papers and immediately submitted them. Right after, I headed to a law firm, hired a lawyer, and filed for substantial damages from both Zach and his mistress. I also called Zach's boss, who had been our matchmaker at our wedding, and reported through my tears that we were getting a divorce. I told him everything about Zach's affair and his mistress. Zach's boss, a man who despised anything against human decency, had repeatedly told Zach at our wedding to never betray his wife. As expected, he was furious when he learned about Zach's infidelity. Word reached upper management, and on his boss's advice, Zach was transferred to a branch office in the countryside. His mistress was moved to a different department where she was made to sort documents all day. However, my sister-in-law's revenge against the two was even more ruthless. Still suffering from the after effects of her injuries, she deeply resented Zach's actions that day. To vent her hatred, she did something even more extreme than what I did. By coincidence, she was working at one of Zach's company's clients and knew some of Zach's colleagues. Using her connections, she revealed and spread within the company the cruelty she and her child had suffered that day. The company's employees, who had thought the divorce was due only to the affair, were shocked to learn the truth. Zach's abandonment of his own sister to cover up his affair was a huge shock to everyone in the company. The rumor quickly spread throughout the company, and Zach was universally suspected of being a terrible human being. Once he was ostracized by everyone, his work was impacted, and after a while, he was demoted. He couldn't stand being avoided by everyone and found it hard to continue working at his new post, so he ended up quitting. To pay me the high alimony, he drained his savings and is still paying me by working live-in part-time jobs. Almost all his salary goes towards the payment, and I've heard he can't even afford a coat for winter and shivers in thin t-shirts. As for the mistress, she was stubbornly clinging to her job, amidst the judgmental glances of her coworkers, despite my demand for damages. After consulting my lawyer, I decided to ask her parents for the payment. When her parents learned about it, they were shocked and immediately made their daughter pay the full amount after confirming the facts. I kept receiving calls from her, which I never answered, but she left numerous abusive messages in my voicemail, saying, "Why did you tell my parents? I had to go into debt to make the payments. My life is ruined because of you." As I found it unbearable, I sent these messages to her parents. I received an apology letter later, promising they would never let their daughter trouble me again, and the harassing phone calls stopped. As for my sister-in-law, her abusive boyfriend's actions became a police matter, and she was able to file for damages for her injuries. It had been tough, but she finally managed to break up with him. My in-laws and sister-in-law apologized to me for initially suspecting me and for Zach's infidelity. Of course, both were painful experiences for me, but I could understand their outrage and loss of composure when they saw their daughter taken away in an ambulance after such severe abuse. After all, Zach's affair wasn't their fault. I didn't hold a grudge against them. On the contrary, I wanted them to properly heal the emotional wounds of my sister-in-law and her child, who had such a terrible experience. If I were in their shoes, I'm sure my parents would have reacted the same way. Furthermore, my in-laws and sister-in-law are fundamentally decent people. Now that I've divorced Zach, I'll probably never see them again, as they are now strangers to me. But I sincerely wish them well and hope they take care of themselves. I moved closer to the cafe I run. Since it's within walking distance, I no longer have to worry about the last train, and I can devote my time to coming up with new menu ideas. Though I was thrown around by unexpected events, I probably wouldn't have been happy if I continued to be married. There are things one must never do as a human being. I firmly intend to always keep that in mind and live a life I can be proud of. That's what I strongly believe. Acting all high and mighty over pocket change. Ugh. Those were the words thrown at me after I had arranged $30,000 for my eldest son and his wife's liver transplant. I couldn't believe she'd say something like this to me. And this was money they'd asked to borrow. The wife of the man getting the surgery seemed to revel in my reaction, smirking at me after spitting out those awful words. My patience quickly reached its limit. If this is who they are, then spending my money on them? I took my money back and walked out of the hospital room. I am Keely, a housewife who just turned 72 this spring. My husband passed away 3 years ago, and I've been living alone since then. My son Nick is 43 this year. He's married, has his own family, and is financially independent. I'm living quietly alone in the countryside, relying on my late husband's pension. I'm used to the rural life, but sometimes it gets a little lonely at this age. I've asked Nick to visit when he has time, but he's often too busy with work to make it. I even suggested that just his wife Ellie could visit, but she's also busy, she says. Ellie doesn't work. She's a stay-at-home wife. I would think she has time, but every time I reach out, she claims to be busy. Recently, I found out that Ellie's busy is an outright lie. My eldest son and his wife live in an apartment about a 10-minute walk from Ellie's family home. Apparently, Ellie spends most of her days at her family home. I even heard from Nick that she often stays overnight there. As a mother, I really want her to take proper care of Nick, her husband. But that single thought feels like it could escalate into a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict. So I keep it to myself. Nick, you need to manage your wife better. I feel like Ellie has a bit of control over my son, and Nick is completely smitten with her. He seems to excuse everything she does. Even during New Year's, they don't visit, which makes me think Ellie is intentionally avoiding this place. I'm concerned, but I also don't want to stir up trouble between them. So I've decided to hold my tongue. At this time, I was still thinking that as long as I keep quiet, everything would be fine. This is how our distant relationship was, until a sudden event changed everything. I heard that Ellie got sick and had to be hospitalized. It turns out her condition is serious, and she needs surgery, according to Nick. Although I don't know much about the illness, she apparently needs a liver transplant. Hearing liver transplant, my voice left me. I can't help but worry about how hard it must be for Ellie. Liver transplants aren't only expensive, but they also require a donor. I'll visit her. Planning to visit her as soon as the next day, I told Nick. However, he quickly said, "You don't have to come." He explained that she had just been admitted and wasn't settled yet. Rather, there's something I want to ask you. Nick said that first. It's been a long time since my son asked me for a favor. I listened, wondering what it was, and it turned out to be about the surgical expenses. Apparently, the liver transplant surgery, post-op treatment, and hospitalization will cost close to $30,000. Sure, $30,000 is a lot of money. However, I know that my son earns a better-than-average salary. On top of that, they don't have children. I assumed they would have saved up that much by now. You can afford it, can't you? You guys don't have any savings? We just bought a new apartment, so our savings are depleted. He hesitates as he says it. I had no idea they had moved into a new apartment. I was shocked to learn about this for the first time today. It's unbelievable that they changed their address and didn't even tell me, their own mother. What? You moved? Bought an apartment? Why am I hearing about this now? What were you thinking? I couldn't help but raise my voice. My son quickly says, "We've been busy, and I meant to tell you." But I think he deliberately kept it from me. Maybe he thought I'd visit if he told me they bought a new place. I'm not feeling great about this. And yet, turning down my son's request is also difficult. I let out a small sigh. Will $30,000 cover it? I have a nest egg from when my husband was still alive, and my survivor benefits are more than enough for me to live on alone. It's enough. Sorry, Mom. All right, I'll bring it over this weekend. At my words, Nick visibly relaxes. He must have been really desperate, but I wonder why he didn't consult with Ellie's parents first, given that he's always hanging out there. My son might not have wanted to consult his in-laws. I have various thoughts, but for now, I want Ellie to recover after the surgery. That's all I was genuinely thinking. Although it might sound presumptuous, I was thinking, if this $30,000 saves Ellie... I went to see my son and his wife for the first time in a long time over the weekend. I thought it best to bring the money directly to the hospital where Ellie is staying, so I arranged to meet Nick there. Even after informing him that I had arrived at the hospital, Nick took a while to show up. I waited for about 15 minutes. "Did you bring it?" That was the first thing he said when he finally appeared. I thought there would be more to say, but I guess the situation was just that urgent. As I handed over the bag containing $30,000, Nick snatched it from my hands. Quickly confirming its contents, he said, "You can go home now." What? I was taken aback. His attitude, essentially telling me to leave after handing over the money, was irritating, even for me. Even if he's worried about Ellie's condition, this is no excuse for such rudeness. I guess my displeasure showed up on my face. Nick looked at me and clicked his tongue. What's the big deal? We're going through a lot here. Don't expect anything in return. Nick looked at me and clicked his tongue, yelling at me out of nowhere. I'd never been yelled at by my son before. He was always such an obedient child. I stared at him in disbelief. Ever since Ellie became his wife, it feels like his personality has changed. The Nick glaring at me with an intense expression was someone I didn't recognize. What's with this attitude toward your mother? Although I thought it was embarrassing to have a family argument in the hospital lobby, this was something I couldn't overlook. If I didn't correct my son here, I felt it would lead to something terrible. But it seemed like my anger didn't affect Nick at all. He snickered and turned his back on me. I thought about chasing after him, but feeling his complete rejection, I lost the will to do so. There was nothing more I could do. I decided to leave and headed for the exit. Just then, a woman said to me, "Oh, it's been a long time." Seeing her face, I snapped back to reality. It was Ellie's mother, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. Hurriedly, I bowed and said, "It's been a while." She was probably here to visit someone in the town hospital. I told Ellie's mother, "I came to visit, but can't find the room." She cheerfully said, "Well then, let's go together." Despite her daughter being in the hospital, she remained incredibly upbeat. The room Ellie was in turned out to be a private room. Apparently, she had insisted on having a private room. I was even more surprised it was a special room. It seemed extravagant, considering they were complaining about not having enough for the transplant and treatment costs. I knocked, and right away, Nick's voice answered. When Ellie's mother opened the door, I saw my son and his wife smiling warmly. A smile they never showed me, but had for Ellie's mother, making my heart ache just a bit. Ellie, sitting up in bed, noticed me standing behind her mother right away. Immediately, a frown formed on her face. "Oh, so your mother-in-law is here too, huh?" The careless way she looked at me was like I was something unpleasant. There's a bag of cash on the bedside table, the one I just gave to Nick. $30,000 is a lot of money. Leaving it there like that almost makes me dizzy. "Mom, you're still here? Haven't you taken care of everything already?" Nick spoke to me with a tone that was almost spitting the words out. I don't understand why I'm being treated this way. Ellie's mother doesn't seem too bothered by Nick's attitude. She just smiles. I bumped into Ellie's mother. I was about to leave, but she invited me to visit. Ignoring Nick's rude behavior, I responded. I thought it best to pretend not to notice and let it go. Encouraged by Ellie's mother, I sit in the round chair and start asking Ellie about her health and how she's feeling. Ellie, reluctantly perhaps, but unable to mistreat me in front of her mother, explains her medical condition. Turns out they found a donor for her liver transplant rather quickly. It's a cousin of Ellie's, apparently. If the transplant is successful, she'll recover her health. Enough already. Can you leave? My son clearly can't stand me being here. His leg shakes in what seems like frustration or anger. His attitude is getting to me. Your wife is sick, you know. It's natural for me to be concerned. Why are you acting this way? I brought what you asked for all the way here. Don't you think you owe me at least a thank you? At my words, Nick's face turns red. Ellie snickers at me from her bed, as if making fun of me. Acting all high and mighty over chump change. It's a turnoff to be lectured like this. I'm stunned by the words hurled at me from Ellie. Nick really has changed. Ellie's mother being here doesn't matter to him anymore. Chump change? $30,000 is chump change to you? You too couldn't come up with it, could you? How dare you insult me? And that attitude. Can't you do something about it? It's just rude. I can't help but stand up from my chair. The eldest son and his wife show no signs of being fazed. What kind of people are they? Really? It's beyond infuriating. It's baffling. Ellie's mother is just standing there, smiling and saying, "Oh dear." Maybe she's just clueless, but I think she's also a bit out of touch with reality. The eldest son and his wife continue to call me stingy and a penny pincher. If I just listen in silence, they'll say whatever they want, even digging up things from the past. I take a deep breath. I see. I get it. I was the one who was wrong. Nick stops hurling insults upon hearing my apology. However, his face still sports a smug, disdainful smile. Quickly, I reach behind Nick and grab the paper bag casually placed on the bedside table. It still contains the $30,000 I brought. Heavy to me, but clearly pocket change to them. Nick hastily tries to snatch the bag from me. Not anymore. But I've decided I can't hand it over. What are you doing? Give it back! That's our money! I glance at Nick, who's yelling at me, and carefully tuck the paper bag into my purse. Then I give them both a piercing look. Ellie, in her laid-back manner, says, "I can't have that surgery without that money, you know." At her words, Nick starts to panic. It really is clear she has the upper hand. Ellie's mother casually comments, "Well, that's a problem, isn't it? It's just money, right? Figure it out yourselves. Do you think I'm going to lend such a sum after being treated like this? I'm leaving." I declare to my son that I won't be lending the money. Ellie's mother then turns to my son, smiling. "What will you do? Your wife is in a tight spot." But her eyes aren't smiling. Nick's face pales in an instant. Seizing the moment, I rush out of the hospital room. I quickly jump into the elevator that had just arrived and make my way from the lobby to a taxi. I catch a glimpse of Nick running after me through the taxi's rearview mirror, but I don't care. Feeling utterly frustrated, I head back to my own home. Once home, I stare at the $30,000 I'd left on the table for a while. Then I replay today's events at the hospital in my head from start to finish. No matter how I look at it, I can't see where I went wrong. At one point, I even think about just blowing all of the $30,000 on some lavish spree. I decide to call my younger sister and her husband, who live nearby. "Hey, how about coming over for dinner tomorrow? Bring the grandkids and the nephews. I'm always alone here, so the more the merrier." My sister and her husband are thrilled at the invitation. They say they'll bring their son, his spouse, and the grandchildren. After hearing my sister's response, I quickly contact a high-end steak restaurant and a catering service. I apologize for the short notice and ask if they can accommodate. Both are more than happy to oblige. It's good to have a long-standing relationship with businesses that can be flexible when you need it. I've already requested kids' menus from the caterer, so the little ones can eat too. The next day is incredibly busy right from the morning. Thinking we'll need some sweets after dinner, I go out to buy cakes and donuts. While I'm at it, I also get gifts from my nephew's family and my sister's family, who frequently come to visit. And for my niece and nephew and sister and her husband, who always make time to visit, I prepared gifts for them as well. I buy gaming consoles for the kids, high-end fountain pens for my brother-in-law and nephew, and matching designer bags for my sister and my nephew's wife. Once everything is set, I feel like I really accomplished something. The whole ordeal with my son's liver transplant has completely slipped my mind. As I'm just waiting for everyone to arrive, I casually check my phone and see back-to-back calls from Nick and Ellie. I'm immediately annoyed, wondering what they could possibly want now. There are also text messages, so I check them. The first batch of texts are complaints about me not paying for the medical expenses. But as I read on, the messages turn into nothing but whining. By the end, they're downright begging. I sighed and called Nick on his cell phone. Surprisingly, he answered after just one ring. "Mom, why have you been ignoring my calls?" I was stunned to hear that as the first thing out of his mouth. "Really, Nick? You're the one who usually ignores my calls, you know." As we spoke, the events of yesterday flashed back into my mind, making it hard to contain my irritation. "When are you bringing me the $30,000? I'm in trouble here since you took it back yesterday." I was disappointed and saddened by my son's consistently aggressive attitude. I wondered when he'd changed so much from the sweet, considerate child he once was. While I remained silent, Nick started berating me again. By the second time, I found myself listening more calmly. Besides, the things Nick was saying sounded like childish complaints. All you do is call me stingy and say you're not fulfilling your role as a mother-in-law. None of it resonates with me. I felt indifferent just listening to him. "I heard all that yesterday. Why don't you accept help from Ellie's parents instead? You're close with them, aren't you? Plus, Ellie isn't their biological daughter. I'm sure they'll help. I interrupted Nick's ongoing tirade. If I didn't, it seemed like it would never end. I was also becoming suspicious of Ellie's mother, who was just smiling in the hospital room yesterday. Think about my situation too. People will say I can't even afford my wife's treatment. You're the one who called it pocket change, right? And for the record, I used that money. There's hardly anything left. Nick was left speechless on the other end of the line. He reacted to the news that there was little money left. Why did he treat me like that when he's clearly desperate? I couldn't help but wonder. Just sort out the liver transplant fees on your own. Don't involve us. I made myself very clear. Please relay that to your wife as well. I cut off the call, feeling like I had just tossed out a parting shot. I didn't want my emotions to get the best of me. Even if he's rotten, he's still my son. As a parent, I want to help him. But his attitude yesterday was unforgivable. If both of them had apologized, maybe I would have reconsidered. But there was no apology at all. This makes it impossible to forgive them. Just after hanging up with Nick, I got a call from Ellie. I pick up the phone, ready to settle this once and for all. Mother-in-law, this is terrible. My life is on the line. Do you understand that? As soon as I pick up, her condescending tone irritates me. If her life is on the line, she should be more humble. I told Nick too. Instead of borrowing money from me, wouldn't it be simpler for your parents to help you out, Ellie? I tell Ellie the same thing I told Nick. Ellie scoffs at my suggestion. Seems like she really can't humble herself before others. Then she starts talking about how if I don't lend them $30,000, Nick will be in a bad position. Basically, she's saying she doesn't care if Nick becomes uncomfortable at her parents' house. Honestly, what she's saying almost feels like blackmail. Listen, Ellie, I'll make it clear today. I don't know why you're avoiding me. You didn't even tell us about moving to the new house, and you never visit. I don't feel like you're really part of our family. Ellie listens in silence. I don't want to say this, but can you really call yourself a daughter-in-law? You only reach out when it's convenient for you, and then you greet me with this disrespectful attitude. I don't want to hear your old-fashioned views on daughter-in-law and mother-in-law relationships right now. Just bring the money for the treatment, okay? Ellie has a short temper and gets very angry. She yelled at me over the phone. The angrier Ellie gets, the calmer I become. Raising your voice won't help. Besides, that money is already spent, and there's not much left. It may be pocket change to you, but it matters to me. Ellie gasps at the mention of the dwindling funds. I guess spouses do become alike when they spend a lot of time together. Then what should I do? We found a donor! All we need to do is make the payment! We're running out of time! Her last words were almost a scream. Hearing her, I felt no inclination to help. Figure it out yourselves. Ask your parents or something. They may lower their heads for you, even if I won't. I'll pray for a successful surgery from here. I hung up after saying that. Several more calls came in from both of them, but I ignored all. By evening, they seemed to give up, and the texts and calls ceased. Later, Ellie's father came to apologize to me. I was surprised by his sudden visit, but he was a sensible man, and apologized sincerely. After his apology, I agreed to lend the money for the treatment. Ellie and her mother seem to be extreme spendthrifts. Both spend money freely, while Nick is working non-stop. Lack of savings wasn't just due to the apartment purchase, it appears. They've promised to pay back the medical expenses gradually. They are also in debt to multiple other parties, and seem to be in a tight spot. But the surgery was successful, so I'll wait for them to get back on their feet and pay me back. Their relationship as a married couple seems to be on the rocks due to money issues. They have shared debts and can't afford a divorce, so they continue to live separately within the same home. Nick informed me they will divorce once the debts are paid off. I've decided to do a major renovation on the house where I now live alone. The suggestion came from the nephew and his wife who had invited me to that lavish dinner that day. Since then, they have visited me like real sons would, and the house is lively with the sound of kids on the weekends. Living alone doesn't feel lonely anymore, and I believe the $30,000 I spent that day was well worth it.